All you need is just one trading strategy to completely change your life. You don't need fancy indicators plastered all over your charts or complex trading strategies. In the past year, I've averaged $25,000 per month using this one repeatable strategy. And the best part is it requires minimal risk to make maximum profits. So in today's video, I'm going to share with you step by step exactly how I'm able to do this. And I'm going to show you guys real examples in real time. So let's get into it. So before we get started, I want you guys to understand that price can only do one of two things. Number one being seeking liquidity. This means that price is going to look to take out external liquidity, meaning old highs and old lows. Or if we're not taking out old highs and old lows, what we're going to be doing is rebalancing price, meaning we're going to be looking for gaps, order blocks, fair value gaps, imbalances in the market, essentially meaning internal liquidity. So if we're not seeking liquidity, we're looking to rebalance price and vice versa. So once we understand that price is either going to seek external or internal liquidity, we can form a bias on the higher time frames to look for potential areas that we can target in price. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about internal liquidity or rebalancing price, and we're going to look to identify daily gaps in the markets and how I personally use daily gaps as key targets to trade up into every single day. So right here, I'm on the daily time frame, and what we're going to be doing is marking out daily gaps. Daily gaps meaning that there's an imbalance in price. So as you can see right here, what we have is an imbalance in price. You can clearly see that price has not been traded inside of this area right here. And this forms what's called a daily gap. And you'll see a lot of the times, whenever you see these daily gaps form, you'll see that price usually trades back into these daily gaps to rebalance price. So whenever we have daily gaps in the markets, what tends to happen is that we like to fill these gaps because there's an imbalance in price. So as you can see, what we have is another gap. We can mark this over, another gap, we can mark this over, and you can see price rebalances price right here, rebalances price right here. We can draw another gap. You can see price moves higher, comes back, fills the gap, and then ends up gravitating back towards the upside. So if you go onto the daily time frame and look at a lot of these charts, what you'll see is that there's a lot of daily gaps in the charts, but you'll rarely see that these daily gaps be left unfilled. Majority of the times what will happen is that we'll end up returning back inside of these key gap levels, and then we'll end up gravitating towards external liquidity. So if we understand that price wants to trade back into these gap levels and fill these imbalances in the markets, this can be a clear draw in the market where we can trade price towards. So these daily gaps are going to be very important. So let's go into a real example. So as you can see, we're on the Amazon daily chart here, and what we're going to mark out is key gap levels. As you can see, what we have is a key daily gap. We recently just gapped down. This is due to earnings. And we also have this gap all the way back here. As you can see, this was also a gap from earnings as well, but this time it was a gap up. So as you can see right here, we have two gaps in the markets. We have this gap up all the way back from February, and now what we have is a gap down in recent times, right? This is due to bad price action. So now we'll play out the tape to see how price looks to kind of rebalance these key gap levels. So you can see right here, price just ended up coming down and filling this key gap level. As you keep playing the tape, you can see that price is now trying to get back inside this gap level. So we have two gaps. So we recently just filled this imbalance right here. So we completed the gap fill on the daily time frame. So now this price has been rebalanced. So we end up filling this gap. Now, as you can see right here, now what we have is an unfilled gap. So now what I'd like to see is price come up and potentially fill this gap towards the upside. As you can see, price ended up filling this gap perfectly. And now you can see how it's reacting off this gap level. You can see we end up filling this perfectly. Now we have a bearish candle as well, rejecting off of the top of the gap fill. And you can see if you kind of zoom in here on price, we actually have another gap. As you can see, this time it's a smaller gap in price. And now you can see price after hitting this gap level, what's most likely going to happen next? We're going to come back down and fill this gap that we just recently made on the daily time frame. And you can see price ends up filling this gap. ends up tapping the top of this gap as well, and now we're pushing back towards the upside. So you can see how price reacts around these key gap levels on the daily time frame. A lot of times, if you look at your charts and mark out these gap levels, you can see price gravitating towards those gap fills, right? You'll see price kind of respecting the top and the bottom of the gaps. So with this information, you can potentially have a trade thesis around these key gap levels. So now let's go into a real trade example that I took last week on Tesla. So right here, you can see that we're on my TradeZella stats for this Tesla trade, and it was an absolutely beautiful trade towards the upside. This was the trade that I was looking for and being patient for 2 weeks. I was waiting for this setup to form inside this gap level, and we ended up capturing this move perfectly towards the upside. As you can see, I ended up making $15,000 on this trade. I gave up a few profits off the top. I was up $18,000, ended up swinging some contracts, but still was a beautiful trade, $15,000. And what I always talk about is not how much I made, but how much I risked. In this case, an absolutely insane trade. I was risking $1,500 with around a $12,000 position size. It ended up being a 10.17 risk to reward ratio, which is absolutely crazy. This was my A+ setup inside the gap level, showing relative strength. Everything was aligning in this trade, and we had a beautiful trade towards the upside. And let me show you guys exactly what I was looking for on the charts. So coming into the day on Tesla, as you can see, the key area that I have marked out was this previous gap. As you can see, this is a previous gap back here. We end up using this as support, turn into resistance. As you can see right here, multiple touches at this key area, which is your 232. So you can see this previous gap level is being used as support and resistance, and you can see there's multiple touches around this key area. So if you kind of clear the charts right here, you can see that what we have forming is this flat top break. As you can see right here, Tesla has multiple touches around this key area, which is our 235. Our 235 is a very key area, and you can see if we kind of look left right here, what we have is this earnings gap. So right here, we had this earnings gap towards the downside. If price can get above our 235, what can happen is that we can come back and fill this gap on the daily time frame. I talked about rebalancing price, and whenever we have these big gaps in the markets due to earnings, what will usually happen is that we'll eventually come back and look to rebalance price. So you can see in this case, if we can get above 236, the thesis is that price is going to gravitate towards the top of the gap, which is 245. And if you guys have watched my pre-market preps, I was hammering this trade for 2 weeks straight. Everyone should have been well prepared for this gap fill. It was a really clear setup, A+ setup in my opinion, and we're looking for that continuation. And it also happened to line up with the day after FOMC as well. So now let's go on to the lower time frames. So as you can see, we're on Tesla, we're on the 15-minute time frame here. And what you can see is that we're having clear rejections off of this 235. Clear rejections off of this 235, which is that gap on the daily time frame and also a key resistance level. I mentioned if price can get above 235 and above your previous day highs as well, what can happen is that we can gravitate back towards the upside, towards that daily gap, which is your 245 key area. So what I was waiting for was a clear push, clear relative strength push inside of that daily gap, so we can look for continuations towards the top of the gap fill being your 245. So now I'm going to mark out key levels being your previous day highs, and now we can go on to lower time frames to see exactly what I was looking for coming to market open and how I was able to capture this move towards the upside. So you can see we're on the 1 minute time frame here, and what we like to see is a strong displacement and a strong push towards the upside above our 233. As you can see right here, what we have is that strong push towards the upside. We're clearly inside the gap level on the daily time frame now. We're above our previous day highs as well, being your 235. So I'm fairly bullish on price. It's also relatively strong. It's a day after FOMC as well. So now what we can expect is continuation because we had that news factor. The market is bullish. Tesla is bullish as well. We're going to be looking for continuations towards the upside. So now what we'll be doing is looking for a potential retest of this 235 level. So you can see price taps into our key level. In this case, I was so bullish. This was my higher time frame setup. So I got in as soon as it tapped the key level. Risk was just a break underneath 234. In my case, my targets was that higher time frame daily gap, as you can see right here. In my case, this was a fairly big gap in my opinion. So I also had key profit targets as well. I found this one on the 1 hour time frame. So if we go into the regular trading hours, you can see we had the bottom of your daily gap. We also had this 1 hour gap as well. So I ended up using this area to look to take partial profits at as well. So I dragged this over, and now we can go back onto the 1 minute time frame and see how the trade played out. So now we can go into the tape and see exactly how Tesla ended up playing out. So you can see there, as I was playing out the tape, Tesla had a monster move towards the upside. As this trade was happening, I was taking partial profits along the ways, but I was making sure to hold as long as possible because this was a clear higher time frame gap level on the daily time frame. We also had a super solid entry, A plus setup. Whenever I have an A plus setup, I try and hold for at least 1 hour based off my statistics. That is the best time to sell on an A plus setup. So I was scaling along the ways. Tesla ended up not filling the full daily gap on this day, but it still ended up being a beautiful trade because we had a thesis that we were trying to trade up in towards that gap level. As always, I'm going to pop up my trade executions and my P&L as well, just so you guys know that I traded this in real time. I also traded this in front of 500 people, so I'm going to be showing you guys the live session here in a second as well. So as you can see, price ended up closing right there. I ended up swinging 10 contracts for a push up towards that full gap fill, which didn't end up working out on the remaining contracts, which is fine. Still ended up being a beautiful trade. One of my best trades of the year, where I made $15,000 while only risking $1,500, which is absolutely insane. This trade was the best trade of the month. Also made up majority of my P&L. So I'm super grateful that I was able to capture this. Now let's go on to the live sessions to see exactly how I executed this in real time. As you can see right here, we're on my live session for September the 19th. What I'm going to be talking about is what I was looking for coming into the day, how Tesla was forming intraday, my entries, what was I looking for scaling wise, and how I was able to hold this trade for as long as I did. So let's get into the live session. As for Tesla, I like to see it get above your open candle print low and potentially move its way back up towards 234. For this one, if you are, I'd rather wait for a little bit more confirmation on this ticker. I am still very bullish on the higher time frames, but it has to get above really 240, 234.20. But there's a lot of room on this one. So on this one, you can be a little bit later on your entry since there's a lot of room towards the upside. So right there, as you can see, I just mentioned that I'm very much still interested in Tesla towards the upside. You can buy down here at this 232 level for a low risk entry, but I really want to see more confirmation that the relative strike was going to kick in, because recently on Tesla, we were rejecting that 235 level. So I wanted to see price get above your 235 for that confirmation move back inside that gap level and a push towards the bottom of the daily gap as well. So as you can see right here, I just marked out that daily gap and exactly what I was looking for. I'm looking for that 245.65 on the higher time frames. That is the bottom of your daily gap. I have not entered in just as of yet. I'm looking for a potential entry on the 1 minute time frame and pullback where I can look to get in for a pushback towards the highs on Tesla. Yeah, for me on this Tesla one, you can look at buy the contracts. You can be looking for you can look at the 240s, basically risking off of your previous day low, or it could potentially come down towards your pre-market high. The 240s, I got some of the 240 calls on Tesla around like $2 a contract. If it dips a little bit more, I'll look to add. So far, there's a lot of relative strength. It's inside the gap as well. So if it dips a little bit more, I will be looking to add potentially on a longer term, maybe potentially even next week as well, since we're inside this gap for the 245s. So you can see right there, I was just looking for that retest of your previous day highs. I just mentioned I got the 240 contracts on Tesla at $2 a contract, and I'm looking for that push towards the upside. If it dips a little bit more, I'll look to potentially add underneath that 235, because for me, this was an A plus setup, clear higher time frame objectives. I was going to like to add on all dips on this one for that continued pushback towards the upside. As for Tesla, you can see so far this is how this daily candle. Really, this one to me, this screams like it could come up and fill this gap 246. Like there's for me low resistance. We're above your 234. Like this is the one that you kind of want to. Right, there's a good potential it moves higher. So you can see right there, I'm explaining to the group that I'm looking for that higher time frame continuation. I'm not selling on these pops at high day. What I'm looking for is that continuation, that bigger move towards that higher time frame objective being your daily gap. This is my A plus setup. I personally am going to look to hold more for that higher time frame target. I'm not looking to sell for kind of pennies here. I'm looking for that higher time frame move, which is that daily gap on the higher time frames. Yeah, Tesla, you can see still holding out. You see on this pullback, Q's coming back down. Realistically speaking, what I'd like to see happen for the QQQ at least is a whole kind of this open range. Right, I'd like to see kind of hold this level, continue, and then for Tesla, what I'd like to see happen is right consolidation, maybe consolidating this there, and then eventually launch back towards upside, towards 245 later. I'm still on it, and literally Tesla, I'm still holding majority of my position. I'm still looking for that higher time frame move, 245. This one, as I mentioned, higher time frame breakout, still holding key levels. We're inside the gap.
there's nothing really stopping price from moving higher. But anywhere inside this gap, we kind of mark out, right? This obviously 245 is fairly far away, so that's why I kind of have a.
So you can see right there, I'm looking for that retest on the QQQ for a launch back towards the upside. Tesla's consolidating at the highs. I'm expecting that next leg towards the upside. I mentioned I'm still holding majority of my position. I'm looking for that full gap fill. I'm still very much bullish on them. There's no reason to sell. It's your A plus setup. These are the ones that don't come around often, so you got to hold these ones if you want to be able to capture those higher time frame moves.
I do trade 0 days usually on, like, right, you take some off and then leave some for the end of the day. Because the best entry, what's it called? We just broke outside of consolidation as well, right? We could just consolidate for like literally, I don't know how long this was. But now we're breaking out. So it could have a nice move, right? Based off the Qs, right? As I kind of outlined, Qs bounce off this, right? If Qs pushes back towards high day, oh, Tesla is going to absolutely rock it. If Qs pushes back up towards high day, Tesla about to have like a super kind of blow off the top, 230, like a nice expansion move. As I mentioned, there's nothing stopping it. So you might as well like give it a little bit more room. Because on a day like this, right, there's this gap fill. The next right here, there's another gap fill here as well. So this 240, you can see there's kind of this daily gap. And so there's a daily gap within like a 1 hour. There's a couple gaps here. You mark out this gap, then you mark out this daily gap. But I expect this is low resistance liquidity. If you ever seen how gaps work, right? If there hasn't been anything traded in between here, these things move quick, right? Because there's a gap. There's nothing been trading. There's no volume in this area. It's an imbalance. So these things can move quick.
So yeah, you can see right there, outline the trade perfectly in real time. I talked about this in the pre-market, executed perfectly in real time as well. One of my best trades of the month, and ended up ending the session really off right there. It was 11 o'clock at this time, so I headed off. But as soon as I headed off, the thing actually mooned towards the upside, towards 230, 243.75, which is our 1 hour top of the gap. And then eventually we ended up gravitating towards the bottom of that daily gap, which would have been that full profit target. But beautiful trade on Tesla. I hope you guys enjoyed that. As I mentioned, everything was done live in front of hundreds of students. Nothing is manipulated. If you guys do want to join my pre-market preps, I do that every single day for free, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube. My pre-market prep outlining every single thing I'm looking for coming into the day. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, appreciate it if you guys drop me a like and sub. And I'll see you guys next week for a brand new video. Peace.